Hi, this is Paul. Jonathan Pageau wrote a letter to the internet on Twitter, and I don't know if I ever laughed as hard as I did when I read it. Dear Internet, I cannot send your book, letter, advice, recommendation to Jordan Peterson. I know you think, if only I could talk to him then, but if I could show you the hundreds of emails I regularly receive asking for this favor, you would understand. No, Jonathan, even then they wouldn't. Because my idea, and I know this because, of course, I have the same experience as I'm sure Jonathan does, and we all do. It is such a natural human experience. If only Jonathan could read this book. I remember when I first, or Jordan could read this book. I remember when I first found his videos, and I wanted to get him a copy of C.S. Lewis's Miracles, and I thought, I could, la 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 la. And then the first event I went to of his in San Francisco was the simulation event, which wasn't a great event. And then there was a little meet and greet after, and the guy who gave me this, he was there, and anyway, so you go to the meet and greet and you see this pile of books because everybody has the same idea. And of course, Jordan could probably start a small bookstore if he wanted to from all the books given to him. If only Jordan Peterson, and then same thing goes with conversations. If only Jordan Peterson would talk to X, then, well, it's helpful to ask, then what? So, and it was to make this even more fun, Jordan retweeted Jonathan's tweet. I would very much like to be able to respond to all of the often extremely heartfelt and thoughtful letters I've received, but it's simply impossible. And I completely believe that because some of you have sent me stuff that I haven't gotten back to you from, or maybe they're lost in email, my pile, I don't have an excuse like Jordan does, but it's totally understandable. And everything that all of my experience of Jordan has been kindness and generosity and this kind of thing. But at some point you have to pause and ask yourself, get specific and clear about what you hope your book or letter or recommendation or advice would really accomplish. Just play that scenario out in terms of your thinking and be really clear about it. So for a lot of you, Jordan Peterson becomes a Christian. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know whether he was baptized in the Church of Canada as an infant or not. Maybe he gets rebaptized as a Pentecostal, or he joins the Orthodox or Roman Catholic, or he joins a Christian Reformed Church in Toronto, Canada. If only Jordan would become the type of Christian that I am, or the type of Christian I would like to be, or the type of Christian I endorse, yada, yada, yada. And then a whole bunch of you will write messages that say, no, he can't become a Christian because then he wouldn't be as good an evangelist, yada, yada, yada. Or, well, whatever it is, that magic bullet that you have, he would fix his posture on Jung, he would fix his politics, he would stop doing this or start doing that. Then from his big platform, what exactly? What? And my real example for this is, well, usually people are thinking, the only thing standing in the way of whatever breakthrough we imagine is access to a bigger platform, just getting the message out, like the John 3:16 guy with the rainbow wig and the sign at the football game, or the Super Bowl quarterback who really does go to church and just pauses there on the podium and thanks his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and all the Christians go, oh, that's going to mean a wave, and maybe a few people will start coming to church because of it, but the wave never amounts to anything. There's, on Florin Road up and down here, there are a variety of street evangelists who every now and then go there, and sometimes I stop because I want to talk to them because it looks like, I don't know, not the most intensely productive approach. And so then I actually do talk to these people, and they're almost always from out of town. And so I ask them, I say, follow up talking to people. I mean, how do you know whether this works? And the truth is, it doesn't seem to matter, because maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. They don't know. None of us know. That's okay, I suppose. But what they really like is just kind of participating in this liturgy, and that's what they care about. And so they do it. And I find it fascinating. And I find that all over the place. So many books written, so many tweets on the internet, so many Facebook posts, so much of everything is this religious participation of now suddenly, if I do this thing, then I have, and you can say that in all sorts of different ways. I have fulfilled the regulations of the law. I have completed the Great Commission of Jesus Christ. I have, you've somehow participated in some grander, meaningful thing, and regardless of the outcomes, it was like that one video commentary I did on Kat Rosenberg, I think that's her name, 3 women talking, and they talked about how they did this conference to sort of empower women's writers, and this one, Harper's, didn't have any women editors, and so they sent a guy, and so he talked to people, and so then one of them asks in the video, well, did a lot more women get positions and postings and opportunity? No, we never checked. So then what are we actually doing? Well, we've got this little drama in our head, and we've got this way that we act in this drama. And if we act in this drama and do this thing, then somehow things are fulfilled. And it's magic words, or it's the right drug. I mean, if only we can drop acid in the water supply, then everyone will wake up. Or if we had all the money in the world, Brett Weinstein in one of his videos recently basically said, well, if all of the, if all of the real academics were buffered from market forces, isn't that in some ways some of the real problems of the American university system, that the academics are buffeted from market forces until their little extremely woke college goes belly up? If only such and such would happen, then there would be the breakthrough. And what breakthrough exactly are you thinking about? Now, certainly there have been breakthroughs throughout human history, and some of them have been wonderful, but here we are with all the technology and money greater than human society has ever had, and we still seem to be in the messes we are, and we just imagine that more of it will fix the problem, and somehow poor Jordan Peterson and access to him is all that's standing in the way of the blessed apocalypse. It makes me think of, I preached on Lazarus and the rich man a little while ago, and it's an amazing scene with the rich man in Hades, and he finds himself there, and it's such a horrible surprise, and so send Lazarus to my family, and Abraham says no. No, if someone rises from the dead, surely they'll listen to him. And it's like, no, they won't. No, they won't. I'm getting ready for my Easter messages, and in the Easter story, you have angels standing in the empty tomb, and people walk into the tomb, and the angel talks, and it's like, what does any of this mean? Jesus rose from the dead? What does that mean? How does that change anything? What does this mean? And the road to Emmaus, same thing. They don't recognize him, and all of that is a story about how we simply are. And Dickens is fiction. The ghosts talk and Ebenezer Scrooge repents, but most of the time people have miraculous experiences. They might have an amazing worship service, or they might have a musical epiphany, or they might have some big dose of psilocybin, and for them it's changed their life completely. But often, if someone would sort of watch their life and not hear the musical soundtrack or the narrative, they'd say, it maybe changed a little bit. That's really sort of how we are. And my best example for this is Jesus. Those of you who watch my sermon rough drafts know I mercilessly use Tom Holland's quote from the Dellingpod podcast. Imagine you've got to write a story in which, for the first time, someone who suffers the excruciating death of a slave is going to be cast as being in some way part of the creator who fashioned everything, and he's got to be convincing not just to people now, but for 2,000 years and across the whole span of the world. It's really an astonishing thing to have pulled off as a literary feat, and that 4 people did it is amazing. That's just true. But look at Jesus' life. So no matter how skeptical you are, just for a moment, buy the premise. So here you have the Son of God, and who, again, these 4 people who accomplish this literary feat, the only thing they seem to have in common is that they're connected to Jesus, or they're telling stories about him. And well, what happened? And this is, be skeptical about all of Jesus' miracles. Well, he's known as some miracle worker, and he, at least according to Tom Holland, I think Tom Holland's right, the world's most effective short storyteller. He didn't even write them for the God. They had to be recorded by the gospel writers. And he draws enormous crowds, which he kind of throws away because he won't be captured by his audience. And everybody wants him to wield the crowd for some political purpose, which is exactly what every politician fantasizes about, and probably half of the fantasies that are at work in order to try to get through Jordan Peterson. And, as a pastor, long before any of the Jordan Peterson stuff, I recognized this as a pastor, because even in a tiny little community like a small church of 50 or 100 or 150 people or something like that, whole bunches of people, I used to say it in probably the most grotesque way, people want to stick their hand up my butt all the way through my spine to move the lips of my mouth to get me to say what they want me to say from the pulpit. And it's like, no, I don't, you don't get to move my lips. And, well, why? Well, Pastor, if only you would, call out this other person in the church that they have a grudge against, or, even, it doesn't matter how big a community, you'll almost always get 2 sides battling about something. And even in the tiny little influence economy of a minuscule, unimportant local church, people will draw up sides in order to try and have their way. And it could be their way about the silliest things, like the color of the carpet, true example, or whether or not you should serve hot dogs or hamburgers at your VBS. They will fight about it. And so to try and get the pastor on your side becomes an existential concern. This is how people are. It just is. And so here you have Jesus as the Son of God, the most successful short storyteller in all of human history, draws enormous crowds, according to some at least, does astounding miracles, throws it all away. Just by satisfying the crowd. David Fuller had a great interview on trigonometry about some of this. And, he talks about audience capture, and he's right. And, if you really want to build a big audience, don't tick off your audience. Knights and mooks. Schmooze them. Tell them what they want to hear. Here's this little safe space in terms of your audience. Stay within those bounds. Don't cross them. And especially look for some issue that's sort of become the fulcrum point in the culture right now. It might be carpet color, or hamburgers versus hot dogs, or it might be all of the issues that are in our culture, and find some way to keep hammering on that little inflection point on one side or another, and you'll watch your crowd and your money grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. Just keep playing to that base, and you can ride them all the way up to the top of the hierarchy. And of course, Jesus knows how to do this if he's the Son of God, and doesn't. And so dies nearly abandoned, his executioners dividing up his stuff. But Jesus changes the world. That's how weird reality is. I just love it when the motorcycle is waiting at the light here. it would be the height of irony if YouTube took down this video because somehow I was playing some music from some radio on some motorcycle here at the Light on Florin Road. Anyway, all of this about Jesus, and he changes the world. And part of what you can notice in the Gospels is that people are always trying to sort of get at Jesus with their advice, or not so much their book or their message. You know, Nicodemus comes to Jesus, if only we can kind of enfold him into our little political faction. If only Jesus will endorse my idea, then if only Jesus, and Jesus is just enormously resistant to that, as are most credible leaders and human beings. One of my favorite quotes is from Howard Aiken. Don't worry about people stealing an idea. If it's original, you'll have to ram it down their throats. He was an engineer at Bell Labs that worked on some early computing. And he was exactly right. So, yes, ideas have people, much more than people have ideas. And that's so thoroughly true. And we all sort of understand that the real game of human beings is to propagandize, but we are becoming, I think, in some ways more and more sophisticated in our resistance to propaganda as propaganda has continuing to get played and to colonize people. What do I mean by colonize? I got that word from C.S. Lewis's book Miracles, because this is sort of in order to somehow get the idea so that you can gain control of the power inherent and you magnify the power of the idea as it goes through the system and it goes through history. That's what colonizing does. Ideas and spirits are more alike than we might imagine. Now, I'm not undercutting the ontology of the spiritual world by any means. I want to show how the spiritual world is quite alive and well amongst us, and we have very little idea about how it operates. You know, we're already chock full of them, good ones and bad ones, and they take on flesh, and we sort of become their hosts, but they move our mouths and move our lips and change our minds. The non-player character meme makes good sense. Real player characters are very rare indeed. This morning, Tiago, I don't know who that is on Twitter, tweeted at me, it's interesting to see how things change, especially the cinema-religion interactions. Apparently, the Ten Commandments from 1956 is coming back to theaters via Turner Classic Movies. And I just mentioned them in contrast with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And if you want to have an understanding of where the culture is at, just again, in many ways, our movie theaters are our temples, and our televisions at home are our little personal shrines. And the images are on the screens, and we have many, many, many more images on the screens than just the one little carved ones that might be in the house or in the backyard. And of course, if you're looking at something like the Ten Commandments today, people will be in horror that they had all these white people playing these Egyptians and all of these people in the story. And the Jews, of course. But at the same time, what is really happening in that? In many ways, well, movies are incarnational attempts for the filmmaker, not unlike Jonathan Pageau, what Jonathan Pageau does with carving. And J.P. Marceau just wrote a really fun little piece following up on the conversation that he and I and John Vervaeke did on miracles, and hopefully we'll have one come down the road and take another whack at it. But a lot of Marceau's points were really important, because you know, one of the way too many thematic ideas that I continue to think about is deconstructing this sort of Cartesian dualism with respect to the spirits, and understanding how the spirits work among us. And so in some ways, the Ten Commandments in the 1950s was, well, this is how we're taking on flesh in our little image boxes, our big image screen boxes, and playing out the roles, similar to a lot of the points Jordan Peterson made in his first biblical lecture, we watch and we imitate and we make these dramas. And of course, we sort of look at them now as sword and sandal dramas, and you can just follow the evolution of Bible storytelling in cinema. And of course, that evolution has a lot to do with our cultural evolution as we go down. After World War II, people hungered for the incarnation of, in some ways, the God that prevailed over the Nazis and was in combat with the gods of the Soviet Union. In the ancient world, we know that when proxies fought, that when nations fought, they were proxies for their gods. That hasn't changed. We still are. And the Ten Commandments, the Judeo-Christian culture standing against godless communism, 1956, that's what that movie was about. Of course, today, through intersectional eyes, we see race and gender issues, but white America was writing itself into the story, into the biblical story. Story appropriates. Story appropriation is actually a very high form of flattery. If you really want to know whether your story is actually colonizing someone, see if they appropriate it. That's what happens. It's the basis for evangelism. That's really the job of evangelism, is to share your story and have people appropriate it for themselves or wish to participate in that story. You can see this in The Critical Drinker assessing the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Basically, what's happening is they are writing the Marvel Cinematic Universe into the ascendant morality. They are proselytizing, and others are resisting, refusing to be cast into that narrative. You see, these are gods and stories and spirits and ideas, and they're all sort of taking on cinematic incarnation and fighting before our eyes. And so then, of course, Jonathan Pageau watches it and is actually sort of a prophetic role in watching it and then telling us about what he sees in the religious boxes, the religious image boxes that we are all participating in and pondering and being impacted by and yelling back at and selecting and deselecting and resisting and longing for. All of this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Because we are ourselves incarnate stories, this process of appropriating or rejecting stories, casting ourselves in and out of them, is our most basic agency. We live and die for stories. It is more basic than our physical aspect. It governs us. Part of what we see in the entire transgender dispute has to do with story and embodiment. It's fascinating to watch this come about. We are either colonized by stories or resist them. The major transformations of our lives are when we succumb or surrender to them. I didn't do any commentary on the Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein videos. Jordan's putting out enough videos now that I have to be selective about which ones I want to comment on. But one of the most interesting parts of that video was Jordan sort of asking himself, how many more transformations do I have in me? And I would love to take that section and put it next to the Pageau section, or let's say the Gavin Ashenden commentary on Jordan, because in many ways, what happens in Christian conversion is not so much that we simply try to appropriate the story. I think Jordan's been trying to do that, but it's much more that the story appropriates us. And that is represented in Christian language with conversion. The Spirit descends on the disciples at Pentecost. Until the day of Pentecost, they're hapless, hopeless. When angels talk to them, they have no idea what's going on. Now suddenly, after Pentecost, the Spirit has colonized them, and the Spirit is moving through them. And as I'm pondering my Easter message this week, and I'm thinking about how, years ago, a skeptic told me, said, even if Jesus did walk out of that tomb, so what? Sam Harris is almost certainly not. Give me a break. The real question is, so what? Grant the Christians their point. Grant the Christians their little arguments for the first 5 minutes, as C.S. Lewis puts it, after the resurrection. Grant them that. So what? What difference does it make? And that's where Tom Holland's book Dominion really comes online, because, well, I'll tell you what. Because in the early church, people really believed it to the degree that they stayed in the plague-infested cities. They didn't get an Airbnb and run out to another part of the country where some red state hick with a Trump bumper sticker and a flag in the back of his pickup truck would plow their driveway, and now you have sort of a moral crisis on your hands. The most haunting piece of Jordan's conversation with Jonathan's is Jordan saying, I don't find that spirit sufficiently inhabiting Christians to the degree that that spirit either compels me or makes me think it's real enough to actually be incarnate. Jonathan keeps leaning on Jordan in that conversation, saying, no, it has to take on flesh. And, taking on substance in an icon or in a movie or in a story is insufficient. It has to take on flesh and blood in the here and now, even momentarily, and then we find it compelling. And how to represent or talk about the Spirit coming down and inhabiting us and moving us. And not just an episodic way, but an ongoing way. And in almost every case, that happens through suffering. But that's what we're talking about now. Getting Jordan a book or an idea. So then what really should you do? There's this old thing about not meeting your heroes. Shoot, I thought I put the link in there. Fun little piece. 12 reasons you should never meet your heroes. 1, you won't make an impression. It may be hard to believe, but I'm your biggest fan is about the least impressive thing you can say to someone who hears it constantly. In fact, I'm pretty sure the guy in front of you just said exactly that, and he's got a tattoo to prove it. You will embarrass yourself. So you've got to think of a new line and fast. So suddenly it's your turn and you decide to tell the story about how your hero gave your life new meaning. But now immediately realize this story is long and uninteresting. So you stop and ask what you think is really an insightful question. And he responds with a nod, which you realize is all you really deserve since it wasn't a question at all. But he's talking to someone else. You missed your chance. Also, your fly is down. Now, I'm... Both myself and James, who's appeared on the channel a number of times, one of the most impressive things that I've seen about Jordan Peterson is I've watched him work a line of about 160 people. And I watched him give 160 people, after a whole day of this insane book tour that he does, give them 30 or 45 seconds of undivided attention. And he did that again and again and again and again and again. It's a truly impressive thing. But as his own tweet says, he's only human. He can only do so much. And so, number 3, he will be mean to you. Jordan won't. He won't. He will be nice to you. Jordan will. Even worse than finding your hero is mean is finding out he's overly nice, like eager to hear what you have to say. What? This guy doesn't have friends? He cares, he cares what this know-nothing 20-something has to say about his a seminal work of genius? How needy is this guy? So, touche. He won't care about the things you care about. He will ask you for money. He won't remember you. And again, part of the reason I continue to have a lot of respect for Jordan. I mean, I did 2 or 3 of these things partly because, I was leading a group and, they remembered me, and he's a genuine guy, as Pageau often makes out. He will try to get rid of you, and some will be like that. He would be far more interested in that annoying girl than he is you. He will have a wallet chain. He will seem surprisingly average. He won't be your hero anymore. It's a funny little piece, but it makes the point. And, my friend Warren Mills, who's been on the channel a couple of times, his second book was the one that I've got here about the Golden Rule. His first book that he wrote, which he's still hoping to get published, was about Big Daddy Don Garlits. Because when young Warren Mills was living in Australia, being annoyed at the British Empire for not saving the Australians in the Second World War, the Americans did. He's a petrol head, as he calls himself, and he's reading all these hot rod magazines from California. And Big Daddy Don Garlits is the king of the hot rodders. And so at some point he gets a chance to go to America and meets Big Daddy. And one thing Warren said to me is, never meet your heroes. Warren is a mature guy and so laughs about it, but there's truth to that. Our heroes always let us down because Jordan Peterson can't save the world. I like how C.S. Lewis ends one of his most important books, Mere Christianity. And, to some of you, this is going to sound like Christian pablum. I get that. Someone made a comment. I forget to see if... I see comments and I try to record enough of them on my blog that I think I'll get back to them, but I can never record them all because then I think about it later on. Someone basically made the point that, I think it was about the Christian movies, and it was a comment on one of my videos that, part of what's so horrible about Christian movies is they try to get to the message because they think that, well, just getting that message out is going to do it. Like the John 3:16 guy. Like Jesus didn't sufficiently grasp his own message that somehow even Jesus couldn't pull it off. It's just not a serious thinking through of what human beings are, what this world is like, what our troubles are really, where our troubles are really found. And so C.S. Lewis ends Mere Christianity with this. But there must be a real giving up of the self. Now, what does he mean by that? A real giving up of the self. That in a lot of ways, no matter how good these little messages that we have, these new ideas that we possess, they are all inadequate. That we need something bigger and better than ourselves to possess us, to really take us over, and to take us over to such a degree that there's a self-forgetfulness that we mysteriously find amazingly attractive in others, but terrifying to ourselves. But there must be a real giving up of the self. You must throw it away blindly, so to speak. There's the leap of faith. Christ will indeed give you a real personality, but you must not go to him for the sake of that. What does he mean by that? That's this Spirit coming, and it's the Spirit of Christ, and it possesses us, and we no longer care so much about ourselves. And it isn't that you become some mindless fanatic, but you actually begin to have a capacity to care about other people. And again, other people find that enormously attractive. It's enormously difficult to scale, but that's what we're looking for. As long as your own personality is what you are bothering about, you are not going to him at all. In other words, in a very strange way, don't go him to save yourself. Don't go to him to save yourself. Go to him because you want to lose yourself. Go to him because you realize that yourself is just a silly, boring, and non-player character in a world full of non-player characters, and that he's going to give you a new self which will actually be better than the one you've got. That's what conversion is. That's what a transformation is. The very first step is to try to forget about the self altogether. Your real new self, which is Christ's and also yours, and yours just because it is his, will not come as long as you are looking for it. In other words, and this is what throughout Christian history, Christians have struggled to figure out how to talk about conversion. Because, with a lot of Christians, it seems like it's something you do or something you have to get other people to do. No, again, I always, it's more like falling in love. It's something grabbing you and possessing you and taking over, but not in a bad way, in the best way. Does this sound strange? The same principle holds, for more everyday matters. Even in social life, you will never make a good impression on other people until you stop thinking about what sort of impression you are making. And this is a quote that gets bandied about all over the place in secular stuff, but completely dropped from the Great Quotes website is actually the context of the quote itself. Even in literature and art, no man who bothers about originality will ever be original. Whereas if you simply tried to tell the truth without caring twopence, or a tuppence, I suppose that's what the English say, how often it has been told before, you will 9 times out of 10 become original without even having noticed it. The principle runs through all life from top to bottom. Give up yourself, and you will find your real self. Lose your life, and you will save it. Submit to death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day, and death of your whole body in the end. Submit with every fiber of your being, and you will find eternal life. Keep back nothing. Nothing that you have not given away will be really yours. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him everything else thrown in. And that's his conclusion to Mere Christianity. And again, I know to many of you, you've heard it in your churches, you've heard it in the churches that you've deconstructed from, you've heard it from all the bad kinds of Christians that you run away from instead of being strangely attracted to. I get that. I get it completely. But in some ways, it's also sort of like falling in love. And you watch two lovers and you think, what do they see in each other? But they're looking from the inside, not from the outside. And if it's the Spirit of Christ, what happens is that this selflessness, again, becomes a capacity for loving others. For loving others all the way up to and including your enemies. And that's an unusual trick. Because right now, as in every age, there's all this combat for the truth. Because you've got it and they don't. Can't figure out how dim or evil or uneducated or overly educated they are to believe what they believe. Okay. But this capacity to love one's neighbor and this capacity to love God, well, what does that mean? Well, God number 2, yes, and God number 1. This capacity to give one's life for the stranger. Well, what happened, that was just crazy talk until Jesus, in his life, death, resurrection, ascension, giving his Spirit, sort of poured the code into the human consciousness stream. And bit by bit by bit by bit, it gets at us. And it can be carried in books, and you can share books, and that can be helpful. It can be carried in ideas, and every now and then 1 out of 1,000 times, it seems, someone will say something and a light will come on. And it'll be just another puzzle piece in the overall picture. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a burning desire to have Jordan Peterson read the book that you found so helpful. But I can tell you, being on the recipient end of just a tiny little fraction of it, the possibility that you'll actually know what's helpful for me, well, some of you do it pretty well. I mean, you can see it in my videos. If you manage to colonize me, you'll find your tweet or something, hopefully in a positive way, in my video. But that's probably because you've listened to me a lot. And at least to one degree or another, the mapping that you have of me in your mind is at least somewhere close to the mapping that I have of me and the mapping that I am. So, anyway. Never meet your heroes. Was that the last slide? I think so. The enormous hilarity of this whole thing. Dear Internet, I cannot send your book, letter, advice, recommendation to Jordan Peterson. I know how you think. If only I could talk to him then. But I could show you the hundreds of emails I regularly receive asking for this favor. You would understand. Good for you, Jonathan. Good for you. So, yeah, I can't do it either, by the way. I would have to ask Jonathan. So if you actually want to change the world, I'd say be changed by the world changer. And I look at the story of my father, who, pastored a little church in Patterson, pastored a few other churches after his retirement, even led some Bible studies, moved a lot of fridges, delivered a lot of food in a tiny little circle that he influenced, was, loved by many. But does it matter? Yeah, it matters. It matters to me. It matters to a small circle. But it's part of the great mattering that he was only one who was possessed by him who loves, and whose death and resurrection has spliced that code into the matrix of the world, and it continues to get reproduced today. And so probably, and my advice to people is usually start with the people in your household. Love them well, or try. It might be a great deal harder than you think. Try with your neighbors. Try with your coworkers. Try with the people you sit next to on the bus. Try with the strangers that you meet in the street. I mean, it's absolutely the most common idea out there that love is the answer. But actually living it, well, there's the hard thing. And that it takes some sort of divine possession and indwelling of the Spirit of God to accomplish it. I think that's what you look for. So anyway, fun tweet. Hope my video wasn't too insufferable.